Imagine waking up one morning and the sun is just gone. Not an eclipse, not a storm cloud, but a strange, dusty fog that blankets the entire world, turning noon into a permanent, eerie twilight. And it stays that way for 18 months. Sounds like something out of a horror movie, right? Well, it actually happened in 536 AD. And today we're going to pull back the veil on this forgotten chapter of history to see what it can teach us about resilience and surviving the absolute unthinkable. Welcome to the Chronicler's Desk.
Okay, so let's start with the big question. What was it actually like to live through this? I mean, really try to picture it. For the people on the ground, just going about their lives, looking up at a sky that had completely changed, it must have felt like the world itself was coming apart at the seams.
Wow. Just listen to this from the Byzantine historian Procopius. The sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon. That is just chilling. Can you imagine? For a whole year, there's no real warmth, no bright, beautiful sunlight, just this weak, bluish glow in the sky. Your crops wouldn't grow, the seasons would just blur together. This wasn't just a bad patch of weather. This was a sign, a terrifying one, that the very rules of the universe had been broken. So, of course, the billion-dollar question was, what on earth was causing this? For centuries, this global darkness was a total mystery. An act of God, a supernatural event. It wasn't until recently that modern science finally managed to pull back the curtain and find the culprit.
And the answer? Well, it wasn't supernatural at all. It was geological. And it was way more cataclysmic than anyone could have imagined. We're talking about something called a volcanic winter.
And here's the crazy part. It wasn't just one volcano. It was a devastating 1-2 punch. First, in 536, a massive eruption in Iceland blasted a huge cloud of ash and sulfur high up into the stratosphere, basically creating a veil over the northern hemisphere. And then, get this, just 4 years later, in 540, right when things might have started to clear up, a second, even bigger tropical volcano went off. This double whammy is what plunged the planet into a deep freeze that just wouldn't let go for more than a decade. The effect was just immediate and brutal. Average summer temperatures in Europe dropped by up to 2.5 degrees Celsius. Now I know, 2.5 degrees might not sound like a huge deal, but on a global scale, it's catastrophic. This drop made it the single coldest decade in over 2,000 years. It was so significant that historians have given it a name: the Late Antique Little Ice Age. So, what happens when you have a frozen planet and a sun that's barely there? Well, it can only lead to one thing: disaster. The fallout from this sudden climate shock was swift, and it pushed the entire world to the absolute edge of collapse. It was like a chain reaction, a domino effect of misery. You had worldwide crop failures. We see records from Ireland talking about a failure of bread. In China, they were getting heavy snow in the middle of summer. When the food runs out, famine takes over. And with widespread famine comes chaos, malnutrition, and desperate people migrating, just trying to find something, anything to eat. And to get a sense of just how desperate people were, look at Scandinavia. Archaeologists have found these huge caches of gold, all buried right around this time. And the thinking is, this wasn't people hiding their valuables. No, this was much more profound. These were desperate offerings to the gods, a frantic plea to please, please end the long winter and bring back the sun. Now, you might think that famine is the end of the story, but it gets even worse. And if you find these forgotten histories as fascinating as we do, if you think these stories need to be brought out of the darkness and into the light, then you can help us do that by hitting the like and subscribe buttons and ringing that little notification bell. Because trust me, you're not going to want to miss what happened next. Because the fallout wasn't even close to being over. All those millions of starving, weakened people across the world, well, they were the perfect breeding ground for the next catastrophe. It was the absolute worst-case scenario, from famine to a full-blown pandemic. It arrived in 541 AD, just 5 years after the sky went dark. We call it the Plague of Justinian. And thanks to modern genetic analysis, we know exactly what it was. It was caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis. And if that name rings a bell, it should. It's the exact same microscopic killer that would return centuries later to cause the Black Death. And the way it spread was just terrifyingly efficient. It started in Egypt and hitched a ride on the very grain ships that were supposed to be bringing food to the starving empire. What a cruel irony.
When it hit the capital, Constantinople, it hit with unimaginable fury. That same historian, Procopius, said that at its peak, 10,000 people were dying every single day. This plague didn't just kill people, it killed an empire's dream. The Byzantines were right on the verge of reuniting the old Roman Empire, and this just stopped them dead in their tracks.
Okay, so let's just recap. We've got a global climate disaster, followed by mass famine, followed by a world-ending plague. It sounds like a complete and total collapse, and in many ways, it was. But the story doesn't end there. In fact, this is where, for me, it gets truly amazing, because the real story isn't just about the disaster. It's about how humanity processed it, how we remembered it, and ultimately, how we survived.
And if you want to see that in action, we have to look north, to Scandinavia, which was one of the hardest hit places. The memory of this endless winter was so traumatic, so completely world-shattering, that they found a way to preserve it. They encoded it into their most sacred stories. They turned history into myth.
I mean, just look at this side by side. It is incredible. On the left, you've got the Norse myth of Fimbulvetr, the Great Winter. That's the prequel to Ragnarok, the end of the world. The myth talks about 3 winters in a row without a summer, the sun turning black, a wolf swallowing it whole, and then on the right, you have what actually happened in 536. The parallels are they're staggering. This is not a coincidence, folks. The myth is a memory. It's a fossil of a real event. And that's the really crucial thing to understand here. For them, myth wasn't just some fairy tale or a bit of fiction. It was a technology. It was a tool. It was a way to take the raw, terrifying memory of a catastrophe and crystallize it, package it, and turn it into a lesson that could be passed down through generations. And that lesson, forged in that terrible winter, had 3 key parts. First, you record history. You remember what happened so it's never truly lost. Second, you teach a little humility. You make sure people know that the world is fragile and, yup, something like this could happen again. But the third part, and this is the most important one, you inspire hope. Because the story of Fimbulvetr and Ragnarok doesn't just end with fire and death. No, it ends with 2 human survivors who emerge to repopulate a new, green, beautiful world. The ultimate lesson was, even after the absolute worst, life finds a way. Life begins again.
So when you add all of this up, the darkness, the cold, the famine, the plague, it's no surprise that 536 AD is often called the single worst year to be alive in human history. And you know what? It's pretty hard to argue with that. But maybe the worst year isn't the most interesting way to think about it. What if, instead, we see it as one of our species' most powerful stories of survival? I mean, think about it. It's an incredible testament to the fact that when our ancestors were faced with literal darkness, with plague and starvation, they didn't just give up. They found a way not only to endure, but to turn that trauma into a lesson of resilience for everyone who came after them. And that leaves us with one last big question. The people of the 6th century managed to turn their apocalypse into a myth of resilience that echoed for 1,000 years. So it really makes you wonder, how do we remember our own crises today? And what lessons of hope, of humility, of survival are we going to choose to pass on?